Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to Always Watching, or in this case, Always Listening. I thought this would be a fun podcast to start for topics I don't really want to do a video about. And so in this case, I have been listening to Who the F Did I Marry? This story has been living in my head rent-free since I listened to it. So I'll give you a brief overview. And then just my overall thoughts on why this story has captivated the hearts and minds of pretty much anyone with access to the internet. Tessa goes on TikTok and details her relationship and marriage to a man she calls Legion. And I have a lot of thoughts about Legion, but it's scary how we fight our natural instincts or our survival instincts. Reesa met Legion on a dating app, which probably should have been her first red flag. And she actually matched with him on 2 different dating apps under 2 different names. Now, the lead up to this date was everything in the universe was telling her, this is not your man, this is not your person. God himself intervened and blew out her tires. And still, she insisted. And so one of the reasons she liked Legion is because first, they seemed to have a lot in common. And when she actually got to meet him, he looked like his pictures. So it seems like at face value, everything was checking out. And unfortunately, they met under less than ideal circumstances. He hears about her tire. He immediately rushes over to her, offers to pay for her tire, which, by the way, is a red flag. Like, tires are expensive. Plus, I don't know. Like, it's like, I don't know you. I don't owe you anything. But maybe she was just so disoriented that the act of kindness was like a nice change. And so they go to the Cheesecake Factory, massive red flag, and he proceeds to just lay it all out for her. And Legion was doing something that, a lot of people might not be familiar with, especially when it's happening in the moment. He was essentially just mirroring her behavior, telling her what she wanted to hear based on her reaction, based on her body language. And he laid it on thick to the point where he was even playing, I think she said, a John Legend song. He was really going hard. And one of the reasons she said that she liked him is because he was a really good talker. And I think she saw herself as a really good listener. So, listening to someone like that who's charismatic, who's open about what he wants, it probably was a pleasant change. And from that moment on, their relationship basically accelerated. And it accelerated to the point where they were talking to each other day and night. Like, they started to form this really codependent relationship. And it was just a lot. But when you're kind of in the moment, you don't really notice it, right? Like, you found somebody that picks up the phone, someone that you're not nervous to text, someone that you don't feel like you're bothering. So it felt like she found her best friend and her lover. And then our friend Mrs. COVID hits, and COVID, listening to her story, you do have to factor in COVID. Because I remember being on dating apps and people were actively looking for quarantine bays. So the number of people who were moving in with strangers, I'm sure there are people out there that have far more sinister, far more tragic stories, but don't feel comfortable going online to share it. So people were not moving in their right mind during COVID. And I think during COVID, there's 2 types of people that were probably just happy to have some alone time. And then you had others that were really struggling with social isolation. And so at that time, any kind of social interaction, it really meant a lot. You could tell when we got out of COVID how awkward it was for everyone to start interacting again. So again, we had this very intense relationship and then COVID hit. So I don't think she was ready to decrease that interaction. It made sense to move in with him. Now, moving in with a man after 2 weeks, she even says in the story, and I appreciate her accountability, This not only goes against common sense, but goes against her own moral values. Like, you're moving in with a man that you're not married to, that you don't know, that, like, just in hopes of something positive happening. One of the reasons she trusted Legion so much is not just because he was always available, but he had all these promises. Like, I think he said he moved to become regional manager, and, you know, he was a really high-ranking official in this condiment company. And the thing with Legion is that he was always in transition. So I did have questions in terms of, like, you didn't see him on the website. You didn't, like, if you're a high-ranking official with, like, I'm assuming you would have an MBA at the least, extensive work history. Like, this would not be an individual that would be difficult to track online. But again, this was a man that presented himself as constantly moving. And so I guess for that reason, she was able to bypass it. Another reason he was able to bypass it is because he was saying all the right things. Like, she had a very specific idea of what marriage looked like, and Legion was just mirroring that. And one of the things he dangled in front of her was this house. The amount of times these people were searching for houses, I was tired. I felt like I was looking for houses with them. He claims that although he lived in a tiny studio apartment, he was in the process of buying a house, which became their house. And so the way he would talk, his knowledge of the real estate industry, like the way he would kind of confidently go about things, it made her believe that, you know, everything he was saying was an inevitability, even though it would take time. And the thing with the houses is that this was another massive red flag, because all the realtors that they dealt with basically tried to alert her that, hey, like, the math ain't mathin'. And the one thing that constantly came up is that this man was not willing to show, I think they said, proof of payment. And yet he made these kind of crazy offers that were just too good to be true. And so even though she wasn't able to clock it, he certainly was. And her logic was, you know, I saw the paperwork. I saw him, you know, put the offer down. And so it makes me wonder what would have happened if, you know, a homeowner did accept the offer. Like, what would he have done? So, Legion is described as a pathological liar, which is basically an individual that lies for no reason. This house thing, like, he kind of just kept her hooked on the house. First, it was the house and the car. We'll come back to the car. But the house thing, again, she had this image. And he would kind of discuss these things in a way. Like, he kind of dangled these things in front of her to make it seem like she was inches away. Like, if only I could hold out a little bit longer, I'm going to get this house. And, you know, like, all my dreams will come true. Like, she felt like she was inches away, when in fact she was miles away. And so the other thing about their courtship, I guess you could say, is that he paid all the bills. And it's never explained in the story how he was able to pay all the bills. Like, maybe, I don't know, maybe he was cheating on her. Maybe he had other women funding him. I'm not really sure about this part, like how he was able to pay all the bills. Because it sounds like, despite all his lies, like, his routine never changed. Like, he would constantly, again, he was a man in transition. So he would tell her, you know, like, I'm VP, or like, he would tell her like all these things, like he was moving up in the company, and yet his hours would remain the same. The way he dressed to go to work never changed. Like, she even remembered thinking, like, that is not how a VP dresses. Like, I think what I found kind of hard to believe at times was Legion was not moving in a way that made sense for the kind of man he was portraying himself to be. Like, he made sense if you were like a drug dealer or like someone doing illegal stuff. But if you're VP or you're making all this money at a condiment company, like, surely life doesn't have to be this hard. And she did note that, like, the way he presented himself off work was really, like, he was very stylish. Like, he dressed well. Again, not like Rolex well, but well enough for her to believe that this man was a VP. And again, I get the sense that she's never interacted with people in the circle. So either that or she was just delusional. I don't know. This house situation was just a symptom. And even before they got married, she had a feeling. And I think it's interesting how her whole body, her mind, everything was screaming at her to basically check if this man is legit, even though deep down she knew that he was not, to the point where she started recording voice notes even before they got married. And I think one of the reasons that she was in a rush to get married to him was because it could kind of justify overlooking certain things. Because when you come from a religious family, like, when you marry someone, even if they are terrible, there is kind of an obligation to work it out. Once they got married, she was kind of imprisoning herself. It was like, okay, we got to work this out no matter what. And she was under the impression that her idea of marriage was his. That's because he basically just mirrored her behavior. And I also think one of the reasons that she overlooked obvious red flags is because of his availability. Like, he came home on time. It seems like he was always available to chat with her. I think her idea of marriage was like, yeah, sure, it would be nice to have the house and the car, but she also wanted a best friend, someone to talk with. And he was there. I mean, the guy was there. He was always available. And because he pretended like they had the same idea of marriage, she didn't think anything of him. You know, like, he's paying the bills without question, right? He's giving her walking around money. He's not asking for any reciprocity in this area. He never asks her to pitch in. And as far as she's concerned, she's like, yeah, that he's playing the role. And so she got so caught up in the role playing that she kind of, like, everything he was doing was on a superficial level, that she kind of excused certain red flags. Again, I think she thought, okay, well, worst case scenario, at least I can talk to him. Before they get married, she ends up getting pregnant and having this miscarriage. And this miscarriage was pretty traumatic, to the point where he was unavailable to drive her to the hospital when she needed surgery. And the excuses that Legion gives whenever he doesn't want to be bothered with something is always, like, seemingly rational. Like, I have work, or like, there's no reason to question him. Because again, the way he was behaving, like, I think at one point she said she could set her watch to the garage door opening. So he was at work. I guess he was at work. Just to add to that, another tactic that he would often use is sort of dangle her hopes and dreams around them. Like, if it wasn't the house, it was the car. Like, oh, you're mad at me? I'll get you a BMW. Oh, you're mad at me? Maybe we should get an Audi. And he kind of made everything seem like it was going to happen. Like, anytime they had some issue in their relationship, it's like, ooh, I'm going to take you to London and Paris because I know things have been tough. Like, he was just really good at just promising her things, like these kind of promising her things that clearly would never happen. He kind of presented them with such certainty that she was like every time, you know, she was like, ooh, maybe this is going to happen. Maybe he does mean it like, surely he means it, you know, like maybe. Like, she was really holding on. He was able to kind of do enough and present her with enough proof, like enough of a taste of this lifestyle that he knew that she wanted, to kind of keep her grounded and keep her kind of in the relationship. Again, like, although she saw documentation, she never actually saw him, like, none of these giant purchases came to life. Whether it be the furniture, like, he teases her. He doesn't pay for the furniture, but he paid a couple $100s to keep them in warehouse. Makes offers that, thankfully for her, people are suspicious of. Even though she was going along with it, I mean, the universe was still intervening on her behalf, because this could have been much worse. Their wedding was really a low point because, again, I think she wanted to prove that she could get married. Because the older you get, maybe she had this sense of like, well, where else am I going to find someone willing to go through with it? Plus, he told me that he believes in marriage and all these things. So worst case scenario, we're going to have to work it out. Like, maybe I can change him, or maybe we can work this out. And I think one of the most telling statements is when she said that she didn't want her family to tell her, I told you so. Because it seems like even her family had reservations about him. Like, I don't know who it was in her family that said, this man does not look like a football player. And I don't know what arena football is, but it sounds made up. And it certainly doesn't sound like something that you could make enough money from to invest in anything. Like the whole arena football thing made me laugh because she was like, I don't even know what that is. And for good reason. And so all these side hustles of his, like he made it seem like he was tapping into all these, markets when he was just tapping into nonsense. They get married at the courthouse because of COVID and no one was there. And I suspect she didn't really want to tell anyone because she knew that this was probably a mistake. And she makes a point in saying, I got married and my attitude was like, we gonna have to work this out. Like she really believed that they were going to be together. And I think unless you grew up in a religious family, like marriage is forever. The way she approached marriage even was like, she kind of imprisoned herself with this man. It's like, well, you pick your soulmate and you kind of do your time together. It was kind of the attitude that she was taking. This was not his attitude. Again, he was gaslighting her. He was love bombing her. He was mirroring her. So she wasn't really clocking that everything this man was saying was just not true at all. A lot of men who behaved like Legion, and I will discuss this further on, so remember that. No, I will discuss this, but basically once they feel like they have you, in this case marriage, they switch up. They switch up because they don't really have to try anymore. As soon as they get married, I think she said, I knew I was in trouble. And I thought it was interesting how her instincts were to get a police check or a background check on him, because as hard as she tried to ignore all these things, she knew that something ain't right with this boy. And so as soon as they got married, everything changed. Everything was the same. He started accusing her. He started questioning her integrity. He started picking fights with her. Basically just no longer being that friendly companion that she could rely on. Kind of only thing that she liked about him, which was the conversation and the company, was kind of ruined. On top of that, it's like, okay, I can't talk to you. I don't want to be around you. And you're still looking for a house. Like none of the things that he said he would do have been done. There's no house. There's no car. There's no trip anywhere. There's just absolutely nothing. These kind of delusions of grandeur, like again, I think when it comes to Reesa, like her delusion of grandeur is she had such a specific idea of what marriage looks like. And I think she found someone to play house with, but because she was looking to check boxes, perhaps, there are certain things that she wasn't able to see. She wanted someone that could do both. And I'm not saying that person doesn't exist. Legion's advantage was that he did it with such ease and he never questioned her. If that's what you want, that's what I'll do. So Legion was very good at kind of understanding what she wanted to see and kind of doing it. And I guess that was enough for her. And I didn't touch on this before, but the way Legion would constantly be on the phone with people who were not there, I remember thinking this was a bit preposterous. Like, one of the things that struck me about the wedding is that during this whole courtship, she never really met his family properly. And again, she says it's because of COVID, which is true. But after a certain point, it's like you could have FaceTimed with someone. You could have asked to talk on the phone. But I guess the way this man was talking on the phone, like, it was just giving, like, he was really having a conversation. And the thing is, he would never tell her no. He would just kind of go through the motions. And when things broke down, he would say, well, what could I do? But I tried. You saw me try. That was his whole thing. Like, things just didn't work out, but I am trying. I am trying to do my best. His behavior after they get married, again, he totally flips a switch to the point where he starts creating drama, whether it be the neighbor that has a crush on him, her ex-boyfriend that came to visit, and the lies he would create after some time were easily verifiable. Like, it didn't make any sense as to why he would lie about certain things in the way that he lied about them. Like, sometimes people lie, but even though they're lying, you can't really prove it. But his lies were they were too obvious. She was just like, who would lie about that? I think that's what was very frustrating to her, because she felt like she was a very cooperative sort of partner, and she presented herself to Legion as open to solutions. And so I think in her mind, he had no reason to lie to her based on their relationship. I think the fact that he kept lying to her at first made her feel insecure, and at first made her feel like maybe I'm not making him feel as safe as I should. But after some time, it just became clear that this man ain't right. And I think what was also hurtful is that it seems like she told him everything about herself, like whether it be her dreams to go to London and Paris, or whether it be her dreams to live in this house. And so he would dangle those exact things in front of her. And I guess she was thinking, like, why would you, like, the level of cruelty in that is like, there was nothing to suggest when she kind of clocked what he was doing that this was a man who ever wanted what was best for her. After they get married and the relationship starts to disintegrate, they decide, okay, well, it's probably time for marriage counseling. He agrees to it because, again, he never says no to her. He just finds a way to sabotage the whole thing. And even the marriage counselors were like, how are you married? Like, y'all aren't going to make it to January. You're not going to make it a year. One of the points that came up in marriage counseling is the money. And the money is something that she comes back to a lot in the story, because she's like, well, even though he's lying, I know he ain't lying about the money. Because who would lie about that? Like, that's so extreme. Because he was lying about such a crazy amount of money, and he was presenting documentation, and he was moving in a way that only someone crazy enough to spend that much would move. And so this money thing, now she's asking for more proof. And again, he always showed her enough to suggest that he had more where that came from, but he was unwilling to show her the two bank accounts, I guess, that had the most money. And every time the word offshore account came up, I'm just like, listen, I don't know anything about offshore accounts. I don't know any VPs. But I'm pretty sure, like, that just sounds made up. Like, I feel like if you had an offshore bank account, you probably just wouldn't want other people to know about it because it's giving tax evasion. But yeah, so he kind of comes up with another lie saying, I don't want, money changes people. Once I confirm to you once and for all that I do have this money, you're going to want more. Like, he was really just victimizing himself and making her seem totally ungrateful. Of course, later we find out that he didn't have the money. I think the reason Reesa was able to clock into his lies was because she started to become a more active participant, actively questioning him, believing the evidence, right? One part in her story that really struck out at me was the funeral home or the cemetery, where she, like, the whole thing was like, he was just so good at kind of drawing on her sympathy. And she was getting pretty good at, like, fighting back. Like, she wanted to see his office, which didn't happen before that. Marriage starts to disintegrate as she starts to more actively look into him, and his methods to try and keep her with him gets more extreme. And by extreme, I mean he would start lying about deaths in the family, the most severe being that his stepdaughter, or the daughter of the woman that he used to marry, died. And Legion was previously married, and he claimed that despite the fact that the relationship didn't work out, he still maintains close bonds with the children. In desperation, he kind of brings up these traumatic events. And so her instinct is always to put herself aside and console him, console the family. And again, she's kind of, her logic was like, who would lie about that? Like, she constantly underestimated this man. And the things he was saying was just, it was just hard to believe that someone would say it unless it was not true. And of course, she comes to discover later that, everyone is alive and well. And they all basically, like, he has a history of doing this. And the more she uncovered about Legion, the more shocking it became, because it seems like he has this pattern of behavior, and it's something that he's been very good at kind of recreating. Like, his ex-wife spoke on it, his siblings spoke on it. I mean, this man lied about his family. He lied about having sisters. He lied about things that you just wouldn't lie about. Like, if someone asks you if you have brothers and sisters, if you don't have any, just say you don't have any. If you have one, just say one. Like, you wouldn't really think anything of it. You wouldn't think, oh, maybe he's lying. Maybe he has two sisters. Like, the stuff he was lying about were not things that you would think to verify or think you would have to check. And so the biggest revelation is that basically he's always been someone that had serious problems. And basically no one really really likes interacting with him for this reason. And the transition from sort of investigating Legion to just straight up, confronting him about it, like that's when the relationship fully ended. Her whole personality changed. She kind of had to come to the realization that her marriage was over. And the way she confronted him again, like she just made it very clear to him that I don't believe you. I think what disturbed her is, again, he talked with such a sense of certainty that it was hard not to hear him out. But the evidence was the evidence. I mean, he lied about where he went to school. He lied about where he got married. Like, he lied about so much that was verifiable. And she had no choice but to kick him out. Now, the deterioration of their marriage, I guess, paralleled the deterioration of his health. And it's never explained what exactly he has. But it suggested that, like, there was a lot of rumors on the internet saying this man had HIV/AIDS and all these diseases. Essentially, he was fine one day and then he just was gone the next. And during the breakdown of their relationship, she discovered like his work phone wasn't actually his work phone, and that he had been seeing women on the side, specifically prostitutes, and doing all kinds of things. And so this man got sick to the point where he was just bedridden. And so by the end of their marriage, this man was living out of his car. He was having manic episodes. So I think, like, especially now that more information has come out about Legion, like, it seems like he's a man that has always suffered from some type of psychological issue or like some type of mental illness. That is clearly not okay. And I did have some questions after seeing a picture of him, because I imagine like a very well-groomed man, but nothing about Legion was giving a man that could fake being VP of a company. I don't know, I was just a bit taken aback by his photos, but then I had to consider the fact that he had been sick. But then it's like, how sick? And whatever he was suffering from, he doesn't seem to be suffering from it anymore. Like, I could be wrong. But it seems like he's able to walk and take care of himself. But again, I just have a hard time believing that she really thought that this man was VP of a company. I think that what she liked about him was his emotional availability at the time. And once that switched up, coupled with the financial sort of situation, like, it was kind of her breaking point. So that was a long recap. But what are my takeaways? So first, I want to touch on Legion. So Legion, as crazy as it sounds, like, we've all come across a Legion. I was almost bamboozled by a Legion. And Legion is the type of guy, as she was describing him, like, I thank God that I never fell for it, but just right off the bat, the way he presented himself as very caring, as very he just talked a lot. Like, he was quite a talker. And people that I like, a huge red flag is someone that plays themselves up. Like, I remember I had one interaction with a man, and that could have been my Legion. And I remember what was disturbing to me is the fact that first I felt like he was mirroring me. And then second, like, whenever I would ask him like introspective questions, he would kind of respond with like, I'm the best, or like, he had a very high opinion of himself, and there was nothing wrong with that. But it was like, the way that he would present this opinion was just, you kind of wondered what other people thought of him. And so she did mention that Legion was someone that would always brag. And, he would love to play himself up. And that's a massive red flag, Again, Legion is the type of person that moves faster than you can think, right? Like, he was just bombing her. And she was going along with it. And although she saw all these red flags, like, it wasn't enough. Like, the relationship accelerated faster than she could process it in a way. And Legions are like a disease. It's like, once you let them through the door, it's like, whether or not you want to stop it, it's like a virus. It just takes over. When she was describing like the delusions of grandeur, like, I thought that was so perfect, because I remember on this one date, like, the way this guy would constantly talk about himself and like all the people that he knew or all the things that he was doing, and it was very on a superficial level, and he never like, for example, how do I put this? They're talking about things in a way that, don't you want to be a part of it? Like, you could get in on this. And they're all things that never happen. It's always things that they're building, things that they're doing, but there's no proof that the building has begun or the plans have been made. I don't know if you remember Issa Rae's Insecure, when she's having problems with her boyfriend. And she's like, here's a business plan, start the business. And I feel like people like Legion are like that, where it's like they're so good at making things seem real, but and maybe they present enough to make it seem real, but it's not. And another red flag is timelines. Like, the way Legion would be like, we're almost there. Like, that was another thing that disturbed me. He was like, a year out, like, it's going to be the biggest thing. Like, they make it seem like their success is this inevitability that if you're not a part of, you'll miss out on. And of course, a year later, like, I haven't seen this individual since, but none of the things he said came to fruition. Like, yeah, timelines, especially very specific timelines. It's like, how do you know all that? Real. And another red flag is, the love bombing. It's like someone who's that busy is not available all the time. And I'm not saying you can't respond to a text, but this dude be clocking in and clocking out the same time every day. And I remember what also bothered me about that date was like the constant texting and the constant like updates about their life. It's like, you're telling me information I never even asked for. And of course, naturally, you want to respond with other information. So it seems like she told him a lot about herself, and everything that he was saying was clearly not as truthful. And so she was divulging a lot of information, which made it a lot easier for him to read. And that's something that, really dangerous people will do, right? Like, they'll get you so comfortable. The next thing you know, they're in your house, like they're trying to accelerate. And someone who tries to accelerate a relationship, whether it be, seeing you every day, or it doesn't even have to be like physical interaction. It could just be like the bombardments of texts, the kind of constant updates about what they're doing. And again, someone who mirrors you expects you to mirror them. So someone's always telling you about where they are and what they're doing, even though you have no way of knowing what they're actually doing. Naturally, you want to be like, yeah, I'm at work, here, I'll be done at this time. Like, you know what I mean? They kind of slowly get to know your routine. It's a very sinister thing. And what happened to Reesa easily could have happened to anybody else. Like, thankfully they never had joint bank accounts and they never got that far. But I think with certain men, it's like they need that attention, right? And Reesa was able to give him like a lot of attention, a lot of love. And for that, he was able to kind of capitalize on it. And the thing is, no matter what Reesa did, he was still going to cheat. He was still going to do whatever he's going to do, because at the end, these people are like drug addicts. They're always going to want to get it any way they can. And so those are my thoughts on Legion. I think people like him, when you zoom out, it's like an obvious red flag. But when they're kind of in your space and they interact with you, it can be quite shocking. You could be like, oh my God, I can't believe I fell for that. Now, in terms of whether or not this story is true, to be honest, I don't think that matters as much. I think regardless, like, this is a story that a lot of people can relate to. And the fact that so many people have their own versions of Legion, for me, is disturbing enough. Like, that alone verifies like this story. Like, again, I don't know about the details, but people like this definitely do exist. People like women, men, like, people get bamboozled all the time. And it's easy to, when people tell these stories, like, it's very easy to listen to someone and be like, how did you fall for that? Like, what is wrong with you? But I'm telling you, when you're in it, you see whatever you want. And sometimes to protect your mental health, you'd be telling yourself anything. The way that people are responding to it is, for me, the disturbing part, because it's like, damn, because a lot of us would not admit to this. It's one thing to encounter a Legion. It's another thing to be bamboozled by him successfully. And there's a lot of people that are probably listening to that story, like, they would never get online and forget a 52-part series, like, just one TikTok about it, because it's embarrassing. You don't want people to judge you for it, even though I guess it's sadly more common than we would like to believe. Like, even if you don't believe her, you Like, think of all your friends who have complained to you about the men or the women they're seeing and how delusional you thought they were at the time. But did they think they were delusional? No. They thought they were sane and just fine. In terms of life lessons, there's a lot of lessons to take away from this. I appreciated that she was very honest about her desperation. One of my favorite parts of the story is when she went on this monologue about telling God that, you've taken too long. And I think that's very true. When it comes to marriage, when it comes to relationships, like, you're only as good as the person you are. It seems like if you're not in the right place or you're not satisfied with yourself, you're not going to find someone who's truly going to enhance your life in any way. But you will find people that are willing to tell you whatever it is you want to hear. Again, I think there was a part of her that felt like, oh, maybe if I don't get married now, who's ever going to marry me? So maybe that was also at play, like proving that she could be someone that could get married. And I think people need to get that out of their head. Like, I think the number of people that will get married in the future will decrease, but the number of those who are happily married will increase, because people, like, if you're looking for true compatibility, that will take time. And that will take a high level of self-awareness. You can meet someone that financially meets all your needs, but they could be emotionally unavailable. You could meet someone that's emotionally available, but he's a bum. So you really have to kind of balance both. And I think if you're coming from a place of desperation, you will attract the crazies. Like, if you actually worked on yourself, someone like Legion would naturally repel you. You would kind of clock that something ain't right with this. And you're not willing to fall into the rabbit hole because it's not worth going back to the old you. Like, if you've done enough work on yourself, you are not willing to sacrifice that work for companionship. And so many people are willing to sacrifice their peace of mind just to say that they have someone. And that seems to be the position that Reesa was in. She's like, I'm sure saying I'm married or my husband, that gives people a lot of satisfaction. We have to get out of our heads in terms of, like, it's okay to want to be married, but if your idea of marriage is playing house with someone, then you need to rethink what it is you're looking for and why. And I do think that there is a certain level of desperation that can make someone incredibly delusional. Like, he was delusional, but she was more delusional. She really just tried to see the good in him, and she tried to just hang on to this image of this life that she thought she would be living, at least in some way, but it just wasn't happening. And the thing with marriage is that you can postpone the struggle, but you can't, like, stop the struggle. And I think a part of Reesa thought that marriage would help her skip the struggle. Like, if I get married, this will validate my sense of self. And all it did was basically confirm that she was never in a position to get married, right? She was not ready, because a part of being married is being able to set boundaries, and it is being able to trust your instincts, like having a strong yes and a strong no. Like, a maybe is always a no. If you don't really know the difference, like if your yes and no look the same, then you should not be dating anyone. You need to be very confident in your discernment of people. And that's the thing. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is this religious guilt. Like, I think a lot of people feel like they kind of grew up with this idea that a part of being successful is to get married. But being married in itself is not a success, especially if you're sacrificing your entire being. And I think more and more people are realizing that a lot of these timelines are not realistic. And not only are they not realistic, they're pretty detrimental. And we all have different paths, but something that struck me about Reesa's story is how she was talking again about her religion. I think a lot of people have to, like, recondition themselves, because although our parents were well-intentioned, they can steer us in the wrong direction. And I think a lot of the reason that Reesa was not able to listen to her instincts is because she was always taught to pursue her life in a certain way. And everything about Legion seemed right based on her upbringing, but felt so wrong. And I think people have, like, a part of this actually working on yourself is, like, ideally you want to be your most authentic self when you're dating. And a part of that is, again, trusting your instincts. And how do you trust your instincts? By being comfortable with who you are. And Reesa was not someone who was comfortable with who she is. she was trying to kind of make up for it in some way by getting married. And a lot of people do that. Like, I know a lot of people who are married to folks that they know they shouldn't be with, but it checks off a box and it gets their parents off their backs. So again, that kind of sacrificing yourself. Sometimes the decisions we make aren't even based on what we want. It's what we have been taught is the right thing to do. She married a guy, she went through the motions, everything looked good, and yet everything in her was screaming that this is not the one. I think working on yourself, again, it goes deeper than, working out or, like self-love. It really has to do with, okay, where are your beliefs coming from? Are they grounded in reality? Are they healthy? Like, kind of getting to the root cause of things and then trying to recondition yourself out of it. And that's a really hard thing to do, because as much as I love my parents, a lot of the things I know about money, about relationships, like I've really had to I've had to recondition myself. And as a result, I am able to identify legions. I am able to trust myself better and show up in a way that I feel accurately represents me, and not just pretend to be something I'm not, to gain favor with people that I really just don't give a damn about. I think going to Reesa, like, it's kind of crazy how hard it is to just like pursue the thing you actually want to pursue. Like, we are constantly doing things we don't want to do, telling ourselves we have to do it, but we actually don't have to do it. People talk about self-care a lot and self-love, but I don't think self-care and self-love necessarily means doing whatever you want to do. I think it means having the discipline to actually like commit to the things you want to do and pursuing them actively, and not just waiting for people to come by and do them for you, or not waiting, like being kind of an active participant in your own life. Like, you can't wait, you wait forever. Like, nobody's going to come knocking on your door. So what is that saying? Like, wait in motion, right? And I think Reesa has been waiting and waiting for this Prince Charming. Kind of came into her life at a time where she was quite desperate for hope. And so that made her susceptible to, like, Legion could have been anyone, like, like the state that she was in, someone like that was an inevitability. Like, even if she dodged that bullet, like, you're gonna have to dodge another one and another one and another one and another one. Like, these patterns repeat themselves, and they're not that easy to get rid of unless you get to like the nitty gritty of where these beliefs came from in the first place, and why it's so hard for you to kind of change your pattern of behavior. A lot of people on social media, like, people tell their stories all the time. Like, it's nothing unusual. I mean, there's far worse stories on TikTok and YouTube. But what made her story impressive is the way she told it. Like, her voice, her pitch, her delivery, the way she organized everything, her tone of voice. Like, you just know the story was incredibly triggering for her. But she never like loses control of the narrative. And I'm not sure about all the details. Again, like, for all I know, other things could come out about her. Like, I'm not sure. But one thing is for sure, TikTok should pay her. Because as if over 100 million people had the patience to go through 52 TikToks. That in itself is like groundbreaking. It's like a changing point in social media, because we're told like, oh, people don't have the attention span, but we had the attention span. I mean, it was fascinating. Like, it made for great, like, it was like better than any series on Netflix at the moment. I'm curious to see what the effect of this will be. Like, I think people often forget on social media that you have an audience, and so you really do have to talk to people like they're 5, so they follow you. And sometimes people on social media, like, they'll be telling their stories, but they're kind of telling it in a way that's hard to follow. And they're not really conscious of the audience in front of them. Whereas Reesa was like, this is a long story. And she was very much aware. Like, whether or not she created an outline, whether or not she planned all the parts, I'm not sure. But it was definitely well organized and well executed. And so if you don't want to sit through all 52, there's so many summaries online, including this one. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.